The rain had been falling for hours, not wild, but steady, like it knew the world was tired. On the edge of a quiet road, beneath a flickering street lamp, stood a mother golden retriever. Her golden coat hung heavy with water, her legs trembling. Curled beneath her were three tiny puppies, barely more than breaths in the cold. No shelter, no sound. Only rain and a silence that felt like the world had already forgotten them. Cars passed. Lights came and went, but none stopped. Until an old man with nothing left in his life pulled over. But what could he offer them, when he couldn't even save himself? The rain had been falling since before dusk, a slow, relentless curtain that dulled the colors of everything it touched. No thunder, no wind, just a steady rhythm against rooftops, tree branches, and the long, cracked roads winding through the forgotten edges of Gray Hollow. This was not a storm meant to frighten, but one that lingered like sorrow, familiar, unshakable. And down Route 12, under a hanging mist and flickering streetlight, an old pickup truck rolled steadily through the evening gloom. Behind the wheel sat Jack Rourke, a man carved from silence and years. 60 years old, Jack had the weathered look of a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. Deep-set eyes framed by crow's feet, a square jaw softened slightly by a white, close-cropped beard. His once coal-black hair was now silver and thin, swept neatly beneath a faded blue cap bearing the rusted logo of Midwest Lines, the railway company he had given nearly 3 decades of service to. Broad-shouldered and slow in movement, Jack carried himself with the weight of a man who had outlived more than just co-workers. He had buried his wife, lost touch with family, and traded conversation for radio static years ago. Retired, widowed, and alone, he kept to himself on the edge of town, in a one-story house that still smelled faintly of old tools and rainwater. As the truck climbed a gentle slope and crested near a bend in the road, Jack eased off the gas. His headlights caught movement ahead, small, low to the ground, nearly blending into the murk of water and pavement. He squinted. At first, it looked like a clump of debris blown in by the storm. But then, something moved. Deliberate. Protective. He pulled the truck to a soft stop, its engine ticking faintly as he reached for the poncho behind the seat. When Jack stepped out into the rain, the cold clung to his skin like a second layer. The ground squelched beneath his boots as he approached the shape on the roadside. There, under the dim reach of the street lamp, was a dog, a golden retriever, visibly emaciated, her soaked coat hanging like a curtain of mud-streaked gold. Her legs were shaking. Beneath her, nestled close to her belly, were 3 tiny pups, no more than a few weeks old, barely large enough to be seen under her frame. The mother lifted her head and met Jack's gaze. Her eyes were wide, amber, and filled with something between exhaustion and fear. A low growl escaped her throat, not aggressive, but protective, uncertain. Jack didn't move closer. He knelt down slowly on the wet pavement, letting the rain collect in his beard, his breath forming small clouds in the cold. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said quietly, voice cracked with time and unused warmth. "Just want to help." He reached into the poncho and pulled out a thin, worn towel, one he usually kept for tools or wet boots. Gently, he extended it toward one of the pups. The dog's growl faded into a short, rasping breath. She didn't move, but didn't strike either. Jack wrapped the first puppy in the towel and placed it on the back seat of the truck, returning for the second, then the third. Each was trembling, their fur slick and their paws raw from walking. He noticed, as he picked up the last pup, that it didn't react at all, not a twitch. Frowning, he bundled it anyway. The mother was too weak to stand, so he lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest. She was lighter than she should have been, ribs like folded cardboard under her fur, her breath hitched in his ear. Jack set her in the truck beside her puppies and closed the door gently behind him. The drive home was silent except for the sound of rain on the windshield and the occasional whimper from the pups. The heater blew lukewarm air, not nearly fast enough to dry them, but better than the freezing outside. Jack's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror more than once. The dog had curled her body protectively around the 3 pups again, her eyes fluttering shut, though never completely. Back at his house, an aging, single-floor place tucked behind a line of old spruce trees, Jack pulled into the gravel driveway and parked beside the detached garage. He stepped out into the cold, popped the rear door open, and carried the pups in first. setting them down on a folded blanket in the corner of the garage. Then he came back for the mother. She whimpered slightly when he lifted her again, but didn't resist. The garage smelled faintly of oil and cedar wood. A dusty kerosene heater stood near his workbench, and Jack fired it up, placing a metal pot of water on top to warm. He retrieved a box of cleanish towels from an old storage bin, laid them out around the dogs, and began drying them one by one, muttering to himself like he hadn't in years. He didn't bother with names, not yet. Just focus. Dry them. Get the warmth back. Breathe. The mother licked the muzzle of the second pup weakly as it whimpered and curled tighter into the blankets. The first was asleep. The third still hadn't moved. Jack turned it over gently, feeling along its ribs, his fingers catching on a strange unevenness beneath the fur. He brought it closer to the light. Across its side, barely visible under the wet golden fur, was a flattened patch of skin and a line of broken scabs, old and partially healed, but unmistakable. Like something large and heavy had pressed down with force. Jack winced. It wasn't fresh, but it hadn't been treated either. The injury told a story of weight, trauma, and neglect, of a small body stepped on and left to recover or not. Jack looked at the puppy's face. Its eyes were open just a sliver, breathing shallow but present, still alive. He wrapped it in the thickest towel he had and placed it nearest to the heater. Rain continued tapping against the metal roof above. The garage was dim, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging above his workbench and the warm orange glow of the kerosene flame. Jack sat down on an overturned crate, hands resting on his knees, watching the four beings he had just taken in. He didn't know who they were, where they came from, or how much longer they had. But for tonight, they were warm and dry and safe. By morning, the rain had thinned into a gentle mist, veiling the town of Grey Hollow in a soft silver hush. Jack stood by the back door of his garage, a lukewarm mug of black coffee in his hands, watching the breath rise from his lips. Inside, the golden mother and her two surviving puppies were curled beneath an old electric blanket he'd plugged in just before dawn. The injured pup, the one with the flattened rib and the silent cry, had stirred twice during the night, still breathing, still holding on. Jack sipped slowly. He hadn't slept, but there was no heaviness in his limbs. Something had cracked open in him last night. Something long boarded up and left untouched since his wife's passing. He didn't quite know what it was. Pity, duty, maybe just the aching need to be useful again. But he knew he couldn't do this alone. Not properly. By 9 a.m., the old truck groaned back to life. Jack lined the back seat with two folded blankets and carefully lifted the dogs inside, one at a time. The mother, still weak, nuzzled the smallest puppy before settling beside them, her breathing still labored. Jack scratched the edge of his beard and muttered, "Let's go see someone who knows what she's doing." The town's veterinary clinic sat 2 streets off Main, nestled between a used bookstore and a dry cleaner that hadn't operated since the year gas hit $4 a gallon. The clinic was small, more house than hospital, but the sign outside was freshly painted. Grey Hollow Animal Health, Dr. H. Millen. He pulled into the lot slowly, parking by the side where a narrow ramp led to the entrance. The door opened before he could knock. Out stepped Dr. Hannah Millen, a woman in her late 30s with ash-blonde hair tied tightly in a ponytail and dark-rimmed glasses perched at the edge of her nose. Her features were sharp, almost hawkish. Thin lips, long cheekbones, eyes the color of sea glass. She wore forest green scrubs under a charcoal cardigan, and the moment she saw the back seat, her expression tightened into practiced focus. "Jesus," she muttered, opening the door and crouching beside the truck. "Where'd you find them?" Jack scratched the back of his neck. "Off Route 12, late last night. Just there." She glanced at him, then back at the mother dog. "You bring them in. Slowly. Start with the pups." Inside, the clinic was clean but cluttered. A large saltwater fish tank bubbled softly by the front desk. The exam room had pale blue walls and posters warning about fleas, ticks, and heartworms. Hannah led him to the back, where a metal table and portable heaters stood ready. Jack placed the mother dog down carefully. Hannah began the exam, running gloved hands along her legs, hips, and sides. When she reached the underbelly, she paused. "This is a scar," she said quietly, parting the fur. "A long one. Surgical, Probably a C-section. Jack furrowed his brow. You mean someone delivered her pups that way? Someone without proper training, Hannah replied. It's jagged, not sterile, done fast, maybe in a barn or a garage. She looked up at him. This dog's been through something rough, and she was bred deliberately. Jack's shoulders stiffened. You think it's one of those puppy mills? I think it's likely. And if she came from one of those places, there may be others out there in worse shape. Hannah turned her attention to the smallest puppy, the injured one, and gently felt along its ribs. Her face clouded. This one has an old fracture, she said, likely from being stepped on. It's not infected, but the pain could be why it's not nursing properly. She moved with quiet authority, setting up fluids for the mother, a heat lamp for the pups, and scribbling notes on a clipboard. Jack sat in the corner, watching, hands resting on his knees. He hadn't been in a room with this much movement in years. As Hannah worked, the bell above the front door chimed. Footsteps echoed lightly, and then a voice, soft but firm, called out. Aunt Hannah, I brought you the files from... The voice stopped as its owner stepped into the room and caught sight of Jack. She froze. It was Emily, Jack's niece by marriage. She was 28, slim and straight-backed, with curly chestnut brown hair falling to her shoulders. Her skin was pale and freckled, and she wore a long beige coat over a sunflower yellow sweater and jeans. There was a moment of stunned silence between them, the kind that carries years of unresolved space. Emily spoke first. Uncle Jack? He gave a small nod. Didn't know you still lived in town. I moved back last spring, she replied cautiously. Teaching kindergarten now. Hannah glanced between them, sensing the frost. She didn't ask. Emily stepped slowly forward, looking down at the dogs. Where'd you find them? She asked, voice gentler now. Jack told her. She listened in full, kneeling beside the metal table, gently brushing one finger along the back of a puppy. The moment lingered. After a pause, she added, Mom would have loved this. You saving strays, I mean. Jack looked away. Your mom was better at saving things than I ever was. The silence returned, but it was different this time. Less stiff, more fragile. Hannah cleared her throat. I'm going to report this to the local humane network. There's a vet in Junction Ridge who's tracking these kinds of cases. Dogs showing up with surgical scars and no records. You found this mother on the highway. That's not a coincidence. Jack hesitated. You think they'll take them? No, Hannah said firmly. Not unless you want them to. But someone needs to know this is happening. Jack exhaled through his nose. I don't want them taken. Not yet. Then you'll need to monitor them closely. Twice daily feedings, regular meds, heat, bedding changes. Jack nodded. I'll do it. As the clinic began to quiet down, Hannah started prepping take-home supplies. Meds for infection, gauze, syringes. Emily helped pack the kits, though she didn't say much more. Before Jack left, she paused at the door. I could stop by tomorrow, she said quietly. Help with feeding, maybe. Jack didn't answer right away, then said, if you want. She nodded once, then turned away. Jack lifted the mother dog back into the truck, gently as before. The puppies were already curled in a padded box lined with towels, 2 of them sleeping, one is blinking slowly beneath the heat pad. He looked at the scar on the mother's belly one last time before closing the door. It wasn't just skin that had been sliced, it was trust. Somewhere out there, someone had used her like a machine and then tossed her away. But not anymore. By midweek, the rain had finally let up, leaving Grey Hollow soaked and shining under a pale sun that didn't offer much warmth. The streets still smelled like damp pine and wet asphalt, and puddles shimmered beneath trucks parked crooked along cracked sidewalks. In his garage-turned sanctuary, Jack Rourke stood hunched over a small table, carefully mixing powdered antibiotics into warm broth. The mother dog lay nearby, her head resting atop one paw, eyes half-lidded, while her 2 surviving pups nestled against her side. The injured one, though still quiet, had begun to twitch in its sleep, signs of life Jack hadn't dared hope for 2 days prior. Emily had come by that morning as promised, her curls damp from the fog and a container of chicken stock tucked under her arm. She wore a navy blue cardigan and faded jeans, her posture still guarded but less stiff than the day before. Together they had fed the pups, changed out the bedding, and shared a few unremarkable words. Weather, traffic, a student in her class who ate chalk. Yet, beneath those mundane exchanges lay something more delicate, the beginning of repair. That afternoon, Jack received a call from Hannah. "I need you to come by the clinic," she said, voice tense. "Someone responded to the photo I posted." He arrived 15 minutes later. Hannah was in her office, seated behind a cluttered desk, piled with patient files, and a ceramic mug filled with pens. Her glasses were perched low, and her jaw was set in that sharp, analytical way that usually preceded bad news. She turned the monitor toward him. On the screen was a screenshot from a social media thread. Her original post showed a close-up of the golden mother, eyes wide, ears low, a clear view of the scar along her belly. Below it was a reply from a user named K_Raymond9 with an attached image and a message. "Saw this group in Dalton County 2 months ago. Same scars, same breed. Look familiar?" The image was grainy, taken through what looked like a chain-link fence. 6 golden retrievers, all adult females, were crammed into a muddy outdoor pen. Wooden structures like rabbit hutches lined the back. In the corner sat 2 overturned buckets and a stack of syringes on a rusted metal tray. One of the dogs had a shaved patch and a visible stitched scar, not unlike the one Hannah had found. Jack's face hardened. "Dalton County's over an hour out," he muttered. 73 miles, Hannah confirmed. "I messaged the guy. He says the place was out near an old poultry farm. He was photographing industrial decline, abandoned properties. Says this one still had generators humming." Jack leaned back. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" She nodded slowly. "It's worth a look." Emily arrived at the clinic a few minutes later, having been looped in by text. She brought her father's old camera, a dusty Canon DSLR with a cracked viewfinder, and wore a serious expression beneath her neutral-toned scarf. The drive to Dalton County was long and quiet. Jack drove, Hannah sat up front reviewing printed directions, and Emily rode in the back, occasionally glancing at the photo again on her phone. As they neared the county line, the scenery changed. Denser woods, fewer homes, the occasional billboard half-eaten by ivy. Near mile marker 212, they turned onto a dirt road flanked by old fencing and entered a stretch of land choked with overgrown grass and collapsed barns. They parked near what once might have been a loading dock. The concrete was cracked and uneven, weeds punching through like stubborn fists. A caved-in metal sign beside the lot read, "Rayner Feed and Hatchery." Inside the main building, it was silent, eerily so. The floor creaked under their steps, the air heavy with mildew and the acrid tang of ammonia. Jack held a flashlight, sweeping it across walls lined with wooden cages. Most were empty, broken, or webbed over. Some still had scratch marks along the base. Emily moved ahead and froze. "There," she whispered. In the far corner of the barn, a half-collapsed shelf leaned over a plastic storage bin. Inside were a dozen leather collars, some still tagged with numbers. 002, 007, 010. Jack picked one up. 004. His hands clenched. "This one," he said, his voice low. "This would have fit the smallest pup." Next to the bin sat a crate with broken metal bars, and behind it, almost hidden by shadows, something lay slumped against the wall. Hannah stepped closer, squinting. It was the remains of a puppy, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old, its body curled in on itself, fur still clinging to brittle skin. The sight was silent, but it howled in Jack's mind. He looked away, jaw tight, throat closed. Emily raised her camera and took a photo. She didn't cry. Her hand simply trembled once and then stilled. They spent the next 20 minutes documenting everything. Collars, syringes, cages, even a water dish filled with green slime. Hannah retrieved an empty vaccine bottle labeled with a brand she knew had been banned 3 years ago. "This wasn't just a backyard breeder," she said quietly. "They were experimenting." On their way out, Emily snapped one last photo, an old calendar on the wall, its dates frozen in the month of June. Someone had circled the 14th and written one word beside it in black marker: Cull. Back in the truck, the silence was heavier than before. Jack drove with both hands tight on the wheel. The image of the dead pup still sat at the edge of his vision. When they got home, he carried the supplies inside first. Then he unwrapped the 004 collar and held it next to the smallest pup sleeping by the heater. It fit exactly. The pup stirred slightly, opening one bleary eye before drifting again. Jack didn't speak. He placed the collar in a drawer beside his workbench and closed it gently. The morning after the Dalton County trip, Gray Hollow was blanketed in the dull hush of early fall. The trees had just begun to yellow, and a crispness lingered in the air like a held breath. Jack stood at the edge of his backyard, gripping a post-hole digger, sizing up the rotten length of fence that curved around the rear edge of his property. The wooden slats, weather-warped and soft with age, leaned at tired angles like bones too old to hold their shape. Emily crouched beside a pile of new boards, measuring and marking with pencil lines on her notepad. She wore a pair of thick work gloves, a canvas apron smeared with paint and dirt, and had pulled her dark chestnut curls into a bun that was already beginning to fall apart under the morning breeze. She looked nothing like the prim kindergarten teacher her students saw on weekdays. There was a steadiness in her eyes today, one that reminded Jack of her mother, calm, focused, and quietly stubborn. They worked for nearly an hour in silence. Jack dug the holes, Emily measured and handed off the lumber. Between them, the Golden Mother lay curled on an old towel spread across the grass, her head resting on one paw, eyes tracking their every move but not engaging. The two puppies, now named Finn and Milo, scampered unsteadily around the garden, their legs still wobbly but determined, tails wagging like uncertain questions. "She hasn't fed them this morning," Emily said quietly as she rose from the ground. She brushed dirt from her knees and nodded toward Luna. "I noticed," Jack replied, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. "She wouldn't eat either, just stares." Emily knelt beside the mother dog and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Luna flinched, then shifted slightly but didn't growl. Her ribs were more visible today, her coat duller in the sunlight. Jack watched her from a distance. "Hannah said that's a sign, didn't she?" Emily nodded, her voice low. "Post-trauma detachment, like animals grieving, in a way. Dogs from breeding farms sometimes reject their pups. Their instinct gets overridden by what they've been through." Jack sighed and leaned against the new section of fence. She protected them in the rain, but now that they're safe... "She's shutting down," Emily finished. They didn't speak for a while after that. Finn began nosing at Emily's shoelaces, while Milo batted at a fallen leaf, occasionally tumbling over himself. Their joy was quiet but contagious. Emily smiled faintly as she picked Finn up and placed him gently on her lap. "I think they have started recognizing me," she said. "They like your voice," Jack replied. "You talk to them like they matter." "I guess I forgot how much that counts." Jack didn't answer, but she saw the way his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Later that afternoon, after the tools were packed and the new fencing stood firm against the breeze, Jack returned inside to check the feed schedule Hannah had printed out. Emily stayed behind in the backyard, brushing out the pups and trying again to coax Luna toward the fresh bowls of food. The mother still refused. As the sun began to dip, turning the sky amber and lavender, Jack came back out with a weathered, motion-activated trail camera. He climbed onto a low stool near the garden fence and began strapping it to the trunk of the maple tree that overlooked the back lot. Emily tilted her head. "Expecting wildlife?" "Not the kind with 4 legs," Jack muttered. "Someone was outside the garage last night. Thought it was raccoons, but the gravel was too clean." Emily stood slowly. "Are you sure?" He nodded, not looking at her. "I checked the side camera this morning. Grainy footage, but clear enough. Man wearing a hood. Walked to the edge of the garage, turned around. No flashlight. Didn't knock. Didn't speak." "Did you get a plate?" Jack shook his head. It was too dark. Motion light didn't catch him in time. Emily glanced toward the woods that bordered the property. Gray Hollow was a quiet town, but this part, where houses sat acres apart and lights were few, was quieter still. Too quiet sometimes. "Do you think it's connected?" she asked, voice tight. Jack finally looked at her. "I don't believe in coincidences anymore." That evening, Emily left before dark. Jack walked her to her car, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his flannel. She hesitated before getting in. "You should call Hannah," she said, "or the police." "They won't do much unless something happens," he replied. Emily looked back toward the garage where Luna still lay silent beside the heater. "I think something already has." That night, the house was colder than usual. Jack lit the old stove in the kitchen, then sat by the window overlooking the backyard. He drank weak coffee and kept the lights low. Every now and then he glanced at the feed from the new camera, checking for movement. Inside the garage, Luna remained motionless for most of the night, her head lifted only to follow the shifting of the pups. Finn curled up beside her belly. Milo stumbled awkwardly toward the food bowl and back, whimpering softly when his mother didn't respond. Near midnight, Jack rose and made his way outside with a folded blanket. He knelt beside Luna, wrapped the blanket around her gently, and spoke in a voice low and steady. "I don't know who hurt you," he said. "I don't know why they chose you or what they took, but I swear to you, no one's ever going to take anything from you again." She didn't move at first, but slowly her eyes shifted to meet his. There was no trust in them, only fatigue. Still, she didn't flinch when he placed a hand on her head. As Jack rose to leave, Luna turned her head and licked Finn's ear once, a small gesture, but it made him stop in his tracks. He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. The morning arrived without sun. The sky was thick with pewter-colored clouds, and frost clung to the brittle grass like spider silk. Jack Rourke stepped outside just after 6, a flannel shirt pulled over his undershirt and a knit cap hiding most of his silver hair. The porch creaked beneath his boots. He squinted toward the garden, where the new fence stood stoically against the wind, and immediately noticed the shape curled in the dirt. Luna. She hadn't moved from that spot all night. Curled into herself beneath the withering autumn maple, she looked more like a shadow than a dog. Her fur, once a muddy gold, was now dull and coarse. Frost clung to the tips of her ears, and her paws were tucked beneath her chest, unmoving. Jack stepped forward cautiously. "Luna," he said softly. She didn't lift her head, not even a twitch of an ear. The bowls he had left out the night before, one with kibble softened in broth, another with warm water, sat untouched. The other 2 pups were inside the garage, wrapped in old towels, dozing beneath the heat lamp. But Luna hadn't come inside, not since yesterday morning. "Damn it," Jack muttered, kneeling. He reached for her slowly and touched her back. She wasn't cold, but her muscles were stiff. Her breathing was slow, shallow. Not from illness, he realized, but from something deeper. Resignation. As he brushed a leaf from her coat, a soft sound rustled nearby. Finn had pushed the garage door open with his nose and tottered outside, his steps clumsy but determined. He stumbled toward Luna and yipped once, high-pitched and earnest. He sat beside her, nudging her side with his tiny snout, then pawing at her shoulder. She didn't respond. Jack exhaled slowly. "You're not giving up," he whispered. "Not now." He gathered the puppy and held it close. Finn squirmed and tried to wriggle free, clearly wanting to return to his mother. Jack looked down at Luna again, and something in him cracked. He sat there next to her, in the cold morning silence, the wind tugging at the sleeves of his jacket, and let the weight of it all surface. "I had a son," he began, his voice rough like gravel. "Michael. He worked the rails too, followed me into the job, stubborn as hell. He always thought I was too quiet, said I should talk more, said I kept things locked up so tight I'd die with everything still in my chest." Jack paused, his hand resting on Luna's back. Her eyes flicked upward, just a little. He was 31 when the switch malfunctioned. Wrong signal sent. Train jumped the track, killed 3. He was the last one out, trying to pull a passenger free. I buried him with that man's jacket still in his arms. His voice trembled now, not from cold. After that, I stopped trying. Moved out here, built fences, fixed roofs, listened to silence. Didn't want anyone close. Didn't want to lose again. He leaned down, pressing his forehead gently to Luna's. "But now you're here, and I don't think you're any more broken than I am." Luna let out a slow breath, then shifted slightly, just enough to press her body closer to his. Not trust. Not yet. But something like acknowledgement. From the porch, the sound of tires on gravel interrupted the moment. Jack turned to see Hannah's gray Subaru pull in. She stepped out quickly, her hair tied back in a knot, scarf looped around her neck, and clipboard in hand. She wore her usual green scrubs beneath a black windbreaker, and her face was set with urgency. "I called," she said as she approached. "Got something you need to see." Jack rose slowly, patting Luna once before heading inside with her. Finn scampered behind. Inside the kitchen, while the dogs warmed beneath the lamp, Hannah pulled out a printed document and placed it on the table. The collar, 004, I ran it through a wider database after what we saw in Dalton County, she said. Turns out, it matches a set of identification codes used in a case flagged in Missouri last year. A shipment of dogs went missing, illegally transported, unregistered, no health records. They were intercepted by highway patrol, but someone tipped the smugglers. The van was found abandoned. Empty. Jack frowned. And no one ever found the dogs? Not officially, Hannah said. The collars were tagged for a vet tech clinic that was shut down after a malpractice report. No trial, no records left behind. The assumption was that the dogs were redistributed to illegal breeders or labs. Until now, no matches turned up. Jack leaned over the paper. You're saying Luna and her pups, they could be part of that shipment. I'm saying, Hannah said grimly, someone moved those animals across state lines, and this little family, especially the pup with the fracture, they weren't just unwanted. They were discarded, possibly experimented on. Luna's scar wasn't from a careful hand. Jack's face hardened. Can we do anything? I've already contacted the Regional Cruelty Task Force, she said. But unless we can tie a current operation to the transport, it's just one more cold case. Jack's hands clenched. They were going to let her die. They did, Hannah replied. Only she didn't. For the rest of the day, Jack stayed with Luna. Emily arrived in the afternoon and helped clean the garage, replacing the towels, warming new broth. Milo was stronger now, playful even. Finn stayed close to his mother, curling up against her side and licking her ear every so often. Luna still didn't eat, but she didn't retreat either. She watched Jack with quiet eyes and didn't pull away when he sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. That night, Jack didn't go inside. He stayed in the garage, sitting on an overturned crate wrapped in an old blanket while the heater hummed low beside them. Luna lay a foot away, her head resting beside Finn. Milo snored faintly in the corner. In that stillness, Jack closed his eyes and breathed, for the first time in years, not out of habit, but out of hope. The wind had picked up by late afternoon, rustling the brittle leaves that clung to the maple trees like stubborn memories. Jack stood at the back of the garage, adjusting the latch on the pup enclosure he'd built from salvaged pallets and old screen doors. Milo was chewing on a stick just outside the boundary, and Finn was curled against Luna, who now followed her pups with a cautious but maternal eye. Though she still didn't bark or play, Luna had begun to eat again, slowly and quietly, as if each bite was both victory and surrender. Emily was inside, organizing a box of medical supplies Hannah had dropped off that morning. Topical creams, a bottle of chewable dewormers, and a new file folder labeled Case, Luna, and Pups. Jack hadn't asked to see the paperwork. He didn't need to. He was past needing proof that something terrible had happened. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the trees when the knock came. It wasn't a rap on the door, but a dull thud against the wooden fence. Jack straightened, narrowed his eyes, and walked toward the edge of the yard. On the other side of the fence stood a man. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a wiry build and a cleanly shaven face that looked too smooth for the dirt-covered boots he wore. His jeans were stiff and spotless, a black windbreaker zipped up to the chin, and a gray beanie pulled low over his brow. A laminated folder was clutched in one hand. His face, pale, narrow, angular, held no expression, but his eyes were restless. Blue-gray, cold. "You Jack Rourke?" the man asked. His voice was smooth, confident, not local. Jack didn't answer right away. "Who's asking?" The man held up the folder. "Troy Cullen, I've come for my dog." Jack's spine stiffened. "You'll need to be clearer than that." Troy tapped the folder. "Golden retriever, female, approximately 4 years old. I adopted her from Greenwood's Rehoming Center 3 months ago. She went missing 2 weeks later. Chip stopped transmitting, but I finally got a ping. Your vet must have scanned her. You're in possession of a dog registered under my name." Jack didn't move. "She's not your dog. That's not what the records say." At that moment, Luna appeared from behind the garage. As soon as her eyes locked onto the man beyond the fence, her body went rigid. The hairs along her spine rose. She let out a low, guttural growl, then charged the fence, barking violently. She threw herself against the wooden slats, snarling, claws scraping. It wasn't fear, it was rage. Milo ran behind a crate and yelped. Finn bolted to the far end of the garden, tail between his legs. Emily came rushing out, eyes wide. "What's happening?" "Inside," Jack said sharply. "Now!" Emily froze, then slowly moved toward the pups, gathering them in her arms. Luna barked again, slamming her front paws against the gate as if trying to break through the boards. Troy didn't flinch. He simply watched, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Strange," he muttered. "She never used to be aggressive." "You ran a breeding ring," Jack said flatly. "Did you expect her to wag her tail?" Troy offered a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Allegations are not proof." Jack opened the gate slowly and stepped through, closing it behind him. He stood inches from the man, shorter by half a head, but steadier by miles. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," Troy said. "I want the dog back within 72 hours, or I'll file theft and obstruction charges. The pups, too, since they're considered derivative property under certain statutes." "You think dogs are property?" Jack asked. Troy tilted his head. "They were bred for function. You think sentiment changes ownership?" Before Jack could respond, Emily stepped forward, holding a trembling fin against her chest. Her voice was shaking, but not weak. "You want proof? She has a scar on her belly, shaped like a V, and we found a collar marked 004 on this puppy. That's not from a shelter. That's a number from your cages." Troy's smile twitched. "If you have concerns, report them. Otherwise, you're harboring what isn't yours." He turned and walked away without another word, slipping into a black SUV parked halfway down the gravel drive. The car peeled off without headlights. Inside the house, Luna paced for the next hour. She wouldn't rest. Her eyes darted to the doors and windows. She barked at shadows. She growled at silence. That evening, Hannah arrived. She examined Luna again and listened carefully as Emily and Jack explained what happened. "His name is in records I've been compiling," Hannah said. "I'd heard rumors about Greenwood's being a front, but nothing stuck. Now it does." They sat in Jack's kitchen, the walls heavy with quiet fury. Emily had pulled out the photo album from Dalton County. She pointed at the broken hutch with the circled date, Cull, June 14th. "It's him," she said. "He was there, or someone working for him." Hannah nodded slowly. "I'll contact the Humane Investigations Bureau, but this isn't going to be easy. He's careful, and rich." "We're not giving her up," Jack said firmly. "No," Hannah agreed, "but we'll need documentation, witnesses, evidence of abuse, everything." The next morning, Jack installed a second motion sensor, placed higher this time. Emily took time off work to begin compiling photos and notes. Hannah filed a preliminary complaint. Troy Cullen didn't come back, but the silence that followed felt louder than before. The courtroom was smaller than expected, just a faded wood-paneled room with dusty windows and chairs that groaned when sat upon. The judge, a balding man in his early 60s named Judge Ronald Keene, sat behind a raised desk strewn with manila folders and a chipped coffee mug. His robe hung a little too loose on his thin frame, and the deep creases on his forehead gave the impression he had long ago stopped expecting people to surprise him. Jack Rourke stood near the bench with Hannah at his side, her expression composed and sharp, glasses gleaming under the dull ceiling lights. Luna lay quietly at Jack's feet, a short leash looped around his wrist. She didn't bark or flinch at the unfamiliar smells, only watched, ears twitching, eyes half alert, as if sensing the gravity in the air. Troy Cullen wasn't present. His lawyer had called in sick. Twice. The judge glanced at the absence with mild irritation, then looked down at the pages in front of him. "Due to the lack of contesting party and the affidavit provided by the veterinary witness," Judge Keene said, voice hoarse, "I am granting temporary guardianship of the animal known as Luna to Mr. Rourke for the duration of the investigation. Any attempt to remove or reclaim said animal by any third party is to be considered interference with evidence." He banged the gavel once. "This court is adjourned." Jack didn't move. Not immediately. He looked down at Luna, who blinked slowly at him. There was no triumph in her eyes, no joy, but maybe something else, something quieter, a flicker of safety. As they stepped out into the cold hallway, Hannah exhaled softly. "That's one hurdle down." Jack gave a small nod. "How many left?" "Too many," she said, not smiling. "But you just bought her time. That matters." That afternoon back at the house, Emily sat at the kitchen table staring at a printed email. She wore a gray cardigan over a floral shirt, her hair pulled back, but a few curls had broken loose and fell softly around her cheeks. Her lips were pursed, and her foot tapped absently beneath the table. The email read, "We would be thrilled to have you join our faculty in January. Your classroom awaits in Ashridge, Vermont. Please confirm your decision within 5 business days." Jack entered carrying 2 bowls of fresh kibble and a chicken broth mix. Finn and Milo padded behind him, tails swaying in tandem. He set the bowls down, and the pups dove in with clumsy delight. "You all right?" Jack asked without looking at her. Emily folded the email and slid it into her pocket. "They offered me the position." Jack nodded slowly. "Good school?" "One of the best." He paused, then turned to face her fully. "You going?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Jack didn't press. He simply sat across from her and poured himself a cup of black coffee, the kind that tasted like burnt earth but warmed the chest all the same. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had weight, like bricks laid between 2 people who didn't know if they were building a wall or a foundation. Outside, Finn began barking, high-pitched and excited. Jack stood, stepping toward the back door. He saw the pup bounding in circles, tangled slightly in the thin nylon leash he'd begun training them with. Milo followed behind, ears flopping, while Luna stood near the porch, watching, not interfering. "I'll help with training," Emily said, stepping beside him, "if I stay." Jack looked at her. "They'll miss you." Emily glanced at the dogs, then back at him. "I think I'll miss them more." 2 days later, Luna killed a snake. Jack was in the garage sorting through a box of spare hinges when he heard the growl. It wasn't like her usual growl. This one was sharp, fierce, alarmed. He stepped outside and saw Luna hunched in the middle of the yard, body low, muscles tight. A copperhead about 3 feet long had coiled near the pup's pen, its tongue flicking, body rising. Luna lunged. In seconds, she had pinned the snake with her paws, teeth clamped down behind its head. She shook once, hard. The snake went still. Jack ran forward, breath caught in his chest, but stopped short when he saw the body twitch once and go limp. Luna turned, blood streaked along her muzzle, and returned to stand beside Finn and Milo, who were frozen behind a crate. She didn't look triumphant. She looked resolved. Jack dropped to one knee and pulled her close. "Good girl," he whispered. That night, he told Emily the story while she prepared a bowl of sweet potatoes for the pups. She smiled gently. "She's not broken," Emily said. "Just protecting differently now." Jack nodded. "Maybe we both are." A few evenings later, a stranger arrived at the edge of the property. A tall man in his late 50s with a sun-weathered face, short salt and pepper beard, and a stiff gait like someone recovering from a back injury. He introduced himself as Cal Reed, a regional field investigator for a nonprofit rescue coalition. "I heard about the Dalton County case," Cal said, adjusting his faded leather jacket. "Your vet shared some info. Said you were involved in a previous bust?" Jack blinked. That was a long time ago. Cal pulled out a folder, weathered and scuffed. Inside were scanned documents, including a witness statement dated 1997. Jack's name appeared in the margin. "Back then," Cal said, "someone passed along evidence that helped break a multi-state operation. A man named Michael Rourke. Your son?" Jack's face froze. Cal continued gently. "He sent a photo log anonymously. One of our analysts traced the footage to a private rail transfer in western Nebraska. Weeks later, he was killed in what was called an accident." Jack's voice was low. "He died in a derailment." Cal nodded. "That's what they said. But the internal report never explained how a maintenance worker ended up on a train manifest he wasn't assigned to. We think someone found out he was working with us." Jack stood still, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt since the funeral. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're in this again," Cal said, his voice steady. "And you deserve to know. Michael tried to do the right thing, and someone made sure the story stayed buried." Jack didn't reply. Not then. He simply watched as Cal walked away, the man's figure growing smaller between the shadows of the trees. When Jack went inside that night, he opened the old metal box at the back of his closet. Inside were train pins, worn photographs, and a folded newspaper clipping of the crash. He placed the new folder beside them and closed the lid with care. The morning light spilled softly across Gray Hollow, warming the frost-kissed grass in slow golden strokes. It was one of those rare mornings that arrived without noise or doubt, the sky a quiet blue, the air still, and the wind gentler than memory. Jack Rourke stood at the new wooden gate, freshly painted white, hands in his jacket pockets. The sign he had mounted the night before swayed slightly in the breeze, the words etched into the grain with steady care. You can't stop the rain, but you can give shelter. Behind him, laughter rang out. Emily's voice, light and free, followed by the yipping of two excitable pups. Finn darted through the grass with Milo close behind, their golden coats shimmering under the sun. Luna trailed behind them at a calm trot, her ears perked and tail upright, occasionally glancing back as if counting heads. She was no longer the broken shell Jack had found trembling under the storm weeks ago. She was strong now, watchful, purposeful. The garage had been converted mostly by hand. Emily and Jack had worked for days to clear space, paint walls, add soft bedding, and stack the donated food bags in neat rows. The back lot now held 3 weatherproof kennels and a fenced play area, shaded by 2 towering maples. Locals had started calling it the Dog Patch, but the name painted above the front arch was official: Golden Rain Haven. The day had come far slower than they'd imagined, but it had come. Troy Cullen's arrest had been the first turning point. Jack remembered the call clearly. Hannah had burst through his front door, with her coat half-buttoned and mud on her shoes, holding her phone in the air like it weighed nothing. "They got him," she'd said, breathless. "Nevada State Police. He used a false name, trying to register a new breeder's license. Got flagged by the system after the Humane Bureau added the Dalton County footage to the blacklist." It wasn't just the footage that sealed the case. An anonymous whistleblower, a former assistant at Greenwoods, had come forward with voice recordings, ledger copies, and a list of all numbered collars sold through the Shadow Network. One of those collars, 004, was now sealed in an evidence bag with Jack's signature on the label. Troy had tried to run, but the truth had legs longer than his. Jack didn't like reliving any of it, but watching Luna stretch her legs and race beside her pups beneath the sun reminded him why it had mattered. Emily emerged from the garage carrying a clipboard and a roll of masking tape. She wore a burgundy sweater tucked into worn jeans, her curls tied back in a loose ponytail, cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked younger now, less burdened. Happiness, it seemed, had found ways to return in pieces. 3 new intake forms, she said. A farmer from Brookline found a litter under his porch. Their mom's missing, but the pups look healthy. Jack took the clipboard and squinted at the writing. "We have room?" Emily nodded. "Hannah's sending over crates this weekend." Jack offered a small, lopsided grin. "Looks like we're in business." A car pulled into the driveway just then, a pale green hatchback with a dented bumper. From it stepped Marla Dean, a plump woman in her late 40s with short red hair, thick glasses, and a permanent sunburn on her nose. She was one of the early volunteers, a retired postmaster, with a fondness for mutts and hot tea. "Morning," she called. "Got the fleece blankets you asked for? And a bag of peanut butter bones from Janet's store. Half off if you promise not to tell her accountant." Emily laughed. "You're a saint, Marla." "Only on Sundays," Marla winked. Inside the main room, Jack helped arrange the new supplies while Emily sorted through paperwork and fielded calls. The place buzzed with motion, but it wasn't chaotic. It was alive. The kind of alive Jack hadn't felt since his son's laughter had filled their old living room. That night, the 3 of them, Jack, Emily, and Marla, sat around a small outdoor fire pit with mugs of cider warming their hands. Luna curled beside Jack's chair, eyes half closed, while the pups slept together in a heap nearby. "I'm glad you stayed," Jack said, not looking directly at Emily. She didn't answer right away. "Me too." The fire crackled softly between them. After Marla left, Jack stood in the yard a moment longer, staring at the stars as they blinked gently into view. Emily had gone inside, humming a lullaby to the dogs as she passed their sleeping forms. Jack thought about Michael, about the fire in his son's eyes, the stubborn righteousness that had once put him on the path that would cost him everything. He wondered if somewhere, somehow, Michael knew that the story hadn't ended with silence. He looked down at Luna. She met his gaze and nudged her nose against his leg. "You did good, girl," he whispered. The wind had stilled, and for the first time in years, the rain had truly stopped. Some storms come without warning. Some lives are broken without reason. And yet, through an old man's kindness, a mother dog's silent courage, and 2 tiny paws that refused to stop chasing the sun, something miraculous unfolded. Maybe it wasn't loud. Maybe it didn't make headlines. But in that quiet corner of Gray Hollow, grace fell like gentle rain. Perhaps this is how God works. Not always with lightning, but with open hands and humble hearts. With second chances wrapped in fur and forgiveness that barks at your back door. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that healing can begin in the smallest of places. Leave us a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and help us spread love. One story, one soul at a time. And above all, may God bless you, guide you, and protect every small creature who still waits for a miracle.